Welcome, everyone. We are so pleased that you are all here today. It's standard time, and I'm Bill Hevlin, and I'm your handy-dandy worship associate for today's UUCC service, now operating on standard time. Anyway, if you are here for the first time, if you're curious about our faith, or if you've been here before or are a long-time member, welcome. Good to see you here today. All are welcome here, whether or not you believe in God or a higher source, hold to humanist or secular teachings, or if you come from another religion, or if you've always been Unitarian Universalist. You are welcome here. The UU Coastside community welcomes all people of all skin tones, the LGBTQ plus community, kids and mature folks, those with life challenges, and those temporarily without such challenges. For here we are working to overcome our society's systemic biases, and you specifically are most welcome here today. Today, we welcome Reverend Brian Ferguson for the first time to the UUCC pulpit. His talk, entitled Mercy, the Antidote to Anger, explores the concept of mercy and its importance for the real-life practice of nonviolence and compassion. Reverend Brian is the newly called minister to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Redwood City, settled there in August 2020. His ministry is driven by the desire to explore and improve the human condition in an interdisciplinary, holistic way. After the service today, we hope you stay on Zoom to join our usual smallish, random breakout groups. These give us a chance to collect and consider our thoughts from today's service. Now, Reverend Brian has some opening words for us.
Good morning, everyone. I bring you greetings from Redwood City, where I am in my apartment right now, and it's really great to be with you. So thank you for having me join you for worship today. And a welcome, I'd like to extend my welcome to everyone. Wherever you are in your spiritual journey, you're welcome here. And I'd like to open the service with the words by the late, great Unitarian Universalist minister, Jack Mendelson. Here in the sanctuary of ancient dreams and wisdom and beauty, we come to grow, to be healed, to stretch mind and heart, to be challenged, renewed, to be helped in our own continuing struggles for meaning and for love, to help build a world with more justice and mercy in it, to be counted among the hopers and the doers. In the face of cynicism, darkness, brutality around us and within, we seek to align ourselves with a living community that would affirm rather than despair, that would think and act rather than simply adjust and succumb. Here we invite the spirit of our own humanity to search out the truth that frees and the life that maketh all things new. I invite you now to join me for our first hymn, Your Mercy, O Eternal One, and it's number 185 in the UU hymnal, and it's sung by the UUCC choir with Linda Grace Frost. So please rise now in body and or spirit and add your voice, or just listen to this beautiful hymn, Your Mercy, O Eternal One.
Your mercy, O Son, I never will forget. I give the whole and not the part of all you gave to me. My goods, my life, my soul, my heart, I yield them all as free. And when in silent awe we wait, and word and sign forbear, the hinges of the golden gate move soundless at our prayer.
Good morning. It is time to light our UUCC chalice flame. Now please join in reading these words by Molly Brewer, entitled A Chalice Lighting for When Things Aren't Okay. My beloved people, I cannot pretend, and so I will not tell you that everything is okay right now, that there is no reason to be angry, that you must be optimistic or at peace. I cannot pretend these things, so I won't tell them to you. But now our chalice is lit, so all I ask in this moment is that we remember the words of Rebecca Parker. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all. By the light of our chalice, let us rest in this love.
In honor of National Native American Heritage Month in November, we light a second chalice honoring the indigenous peoples who lived on this land before the occupation of European settlers. Please join me in reading this land acknowledgement. UUCC acknowledges that Half Moon Bay is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, recognizes that as the original stewards of this land, the Ramaytush Ohlone understood profoundly the interconnectedness of all things and maintained for millennia harmony with nature. Today, UUCC honors the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples for their inspiring commitment to Mother Earth. And now for joys and concerns. In a moment, we'll play a video where we invite you all to share your joys and concerns. While this video is playing, please feel free to share your joys and concerns using the chat window and to read what is shared there by others. And just to remind you, for upcoming services, if you have any joys and concerns that you would specifically like the worship associate to read aloud, please email us prior to the service. One of the ways we create our beloved community is by sharing our own joys and our concerns with one another and finding support from our community. At this time, we invite you to click the chat button at the bottom middle of your Zoom window. That brings up a window in which you can type any joys or concerns. As you do so, we will hear Vera Vandershock play La Grima by Francisco Tarrega. In these times of reflection and renewal, let us remember that it remains important to reach out to one another when we feel the need, and to accept being reached out to. May we find comfort in knowing that we can share our joys and our concerns here among us. All right, and from UUCC, recently the Conference of Parties met for the 26th time to address climate change. We join the world scientists in calling for all nations to make an immediate, sharp pivot away from fossil fuels. In the spirit of experimentation, we are following a different format for today's service and are therefore moving the practice of generosity to now, to this point in the service, followed by upcoming announcements. Let's see. So, on this topic of generosity, we thank you for giving in whatever ways feel the most impactful to you. Your generosity is deeply appreciated, be it your talent, your time, or your treasure. Today, as we prepare for meeting in person and therefore renting space and paying to rent space, your contributions seem especially important. For donations, please follow the instructions for donations in the order of service. As your generous spirit moves you today, please feel free to contribute what you can to UUCC, either by check or online. The instructions for giving by check are also in the chat. While these collections take place, let's take a few moments to listen to our UUCC hymn, We of the Coastside, with lyrics by me, music by Tom Devine, and voices from the UUCC choir.
We of the coastside, we care for our neighbors, seek for more justice and sing for more peace, open in heart and bringing more love for all. We of the coastside, we care for our neighbors, seek for more justice and sing for more peace, open in justice and sing for more peace. Open in heart and sing for love, open justice, care for neighbors, sing for more justice and sing for more peace. Open in heart and sing for love for all.
And now for some announcements. We thank UU San Mateo for their invaluable administrative and professional support. And we want to acknowledge the mutual support during these shelter-in-place times between the fellowships of UUCC and the UU community of Lake County. Regular attendance on Zoom at UUCLC services by UUCC folk helps bolster morale of the production teams. Hard work appreciated by a larger audience. And speaking of UUCLC, Dr. Tova's Page presents a sermon there at UU Community of Lake County on Sunday, November 14th, entitled Growing Possibilities, Wisdom for Times of Transition and Change. We are living in a time of momentous transitions with challenges from the coronavirus pandemic, systemic racism, and inequality and climate chaos. Tovas focuses on the possibilities of these fearful times, speaking on how we can align ourselves with the life-giving forces already at work in our world and helping us to shape what is to come with humility and compassion. And UUCC breaks from our third Sunday gallery view format to present a full service on November 21st on the touchstone theme of nonviolence, presented by the much beloved Clovis Lewis. In Clovis's sermon, Breaking the Silence with Martin Luther King Jr., he asks you to consider how urgently important Dr. King was as the moral conscience of our nation. Once again, we find it necessary to listen to the words of Martin Luther King, because the warnings he sounded about nonviolence not so long ago remain painfully relevant today. And now Reverend Brian leads us in a meditative prayer.
Thank you, Bill. I invite you now to join me in a spirit of meditation and prayer and reflection. And these are the words of Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker. Your gifts, whatever you discover them to be, can be used to bless or curse the world. The mind's power, the strength of hands, the reaches of the heart, the gift of speaking, listening, imagining, seeing, waiting. Any of these can serve to feed the hungry, to bind up wounds, welcome the stranger, praise what is sacred, do the work of justice, or offer love. Any of these can draw down the prison door, hoard bread, abandon the poor, obscure what is holy, comply with injustice, or withhold love. You must answer this question: what will you do with your gifts? Choose to bless the world. The choice to bless the world is more than an act of will. I'm moving forward into the world with the intention to do good. It is an act of recognition, a confession of surprise, a grateful acknowledgement that in the midst of a broken world, unspeakable beauty, grace, and mystery abide. There is an embrace of kindness that encompasses all life, even yours. And while there is injustice, anesthetization, and evil, There moves a holy disturbance, a benevolent rage, a revolutionary love, protesting, urging, insisting that which is sacred will not be denied. Those who bless the world live their life as a gesture of thanks for this beauty and this rage. The choice to bless the world can take you into solitude, to search for the sources of power and grace, native wisdom, healing, and liberation. More, the choice will draw you into community, the endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the companionship of struggle, the importance of keeping faith, the life of ritual and praise, the comfort of human friendship, the company of earth, the chorus of life welcoming you. None of us alone can save the world. Together, that is another possibility waiting. I invite you to join me in a time of silence. Blessed be and amen. I now invite Tom to give us a reading now.
Thanks, Reverend Brian. Today's reading is from The Power of Nonviolence by Karuna Mantena, a professor of political science at Columbia University in my hometown, New York. She says, "No political action seems to enjoy greater moral authority today than the nonviolent methods Mahatma Gandhi inaugurated more than a century ago. For decades, pro-democracy movements in Africa, Latin America, and Eastern Europe have conspicuously embraced nonviolent politics to express mass dissent and to topple authoritarian governments. Plenty of activists and observers have doubted the effectiveness of nonviolent politics. Suspicions of naivete and weakness in particular have shadowed the history of nonviolence from its very inception. Gandhi and Martin Luther King, the leading figures of nonviolent politics, both faced criticism along these lines. Skeptics viewed nonviolent methods as timid and sluggish at best, capable of winning only small reforms. Gandhi and King's moral commitment to nonviolence was seen to hinder the hard choices necessary for radical change. For both Gandhi and King, transformative politics was a difficult road, full of disappointments and reversals. Lasting change required patience and determination, and nonviolence was the most potent and reliable means for achieving it. Far from acquiescence, nonviolence was a resolutely active politics. It required the cultivation of disciplined fearlessness and moral courage to face the demands of political action. Gandhi's Salt March, or Salt Satyagraha, of 1930 and King's 1963 Birmingham campaign are two of the most celebrated events in the history of nonviolence. Both campaigns used the power of suffering to dramatic effect. Nonviolent protesters were subjected to brutal police responses. Iconic images and accounts of the violence circulated throughout the world. Suffering exposed the violence of the state and shifted public opinion against it. Though usually unstated, this kind of confrontation and the sympathy it produces are often the goals of nonviolent protest politics.
Thank you, Tom, for both the reading and the music. So mercy, the antidote to anger. So why am I talking about this today? And why am I talking about it in relation to the idea of non-violence? Well, I just find when I look around the world, there's a lot to be angry about right now. And at the end of this, well, I don't know where at the end, but 20 months into the pandemic, I find my emotions are just a little bit more raw now than perhaps they were 20 months ago. Of course, the political situation continues to be very divisive, and the pandemic has stretched me thin. And you look around the tragedies of the world around Afghanistan, Syria, Ethiopia, and so many other areas where violence seems to be such an ingrained part of the society, and also our own neighborhoods in the United States where violence continues to be a problem. And I think one of the things that the root, I think, of violence is unrestrained anger. So I think we do need to find this antidote to anger. And as I said, I know I'm feeling a little raw and easier to anger now. And when I anger, judgment is not far away. And I think one of my worst times is when I'm driving. I seem to have more anger when I'm driving. And everyone that drives faster than me is crazy, and everyone that drives slower than me is an idiot. And I just find myself raw there. And I was looking for an apartment a few weeks ago, and I went to this apartment, and the people showing me the apartment, I arrived and I had my mask on, and they were unmasked. And they asked me to take my mask off. They said, "Oh, we believe in God and we have faith, and therefore God will protect you. Please take off your mask." And I'm like, well, I'm a minister and I don't think God's that interested in my everyday life. I'm going to keep my mask on. Thank you very much. But I could see I had so much judgment that it didn't matter if they were going to show me that apartment and give it for free. I was probably not going to accept it. And I couldn't help thinking, we were talking, you heard about that reading about Gandhi, but many of you have probably seen the movie about Gandhi. And I always remember the scene when Gandhi's walking along with an English Christian minister, and there's this violent crowd, and the minister's getting a little bit uncomfortable. He's feeling, he's a little bit fearful. He's wondering what's going to happen. And he says to Gandhi, "Do you not think we should turn back?" And Gandhi says, "Where is your faith, Reverend? I thought you were a man of God." And the English minister says, "Well, I am, but I think God's got more important things to worry about than my everyday welfare." And I always like that idea that, we always, is God got more important things? I certainly hope so than looking after me minute by minute. But when we think of mercy, I know one of the readings that comes to my mind, of course, is from William Shakespeare in his Merchant of Venice. And Portia is pleading for her lover friend's life, Antonio, to Shylock. And Shylock asks, "On what compulsion must I show mercy?" And this is what Portia says. She says, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as a gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes. It is the mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes a throned monarch better than his crown. The scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty. Wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings? But mercy is above the sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. But mercy is above the sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute of God himself. And earthly power doth then show like as God's when mercy seasons justice." When mercy seasons justice. So those are the words of William Shakespeare. So you're in for a wild time when the minister quotes William Shakespeare in the service. So I don't always do that. And I actually associate William Shakespeare with mercy because in my high school education, I received no mercy because we studied 13 Shakespeare plays in my high school. So they showed us no mercy in regards to that. But mercy is about showing this compassion respect, and sometimes even kindness to one who's wronged us or perhaps behaved badly towards another. And we often think of mercy as in the reading from Shakespeare, where those who have power over someone but show compassion. So there's an association between power and compassion regarding mercy. But mercy at its best is grounded in love. It's a love that responds to human need in an unexpected, or sometimes, or often, unmerited way. And it's the basis of reconciliation, forgiveness, and, as I said, it's rooted in love. But it helps us connect as well. It helps us connect despite our differences and can open us up to those who we might strongly disagree with. And I think when you look at our political divisive now, a little bit mercy towards those who differ politically from us might do well. And I might have done better to show a little bit more mercy to the people showing me an apartment who demanded I take my mask off. And mercy can just counterbalance that judgment we have of others and opens us up to maybe a greater level of understanding. I often struggle with this idea of mercy being an attribute of God, as Shakespeare claims. And we often hear that in many teachings of God as merciful. We hear it in Islam and Judaism and Christianity. But I look at nature, and nature is without mercy. It can often be cruel. When you look at these predators, who do they target? They target the weak, the young, and the vulnerable. So nature is without mercy. Mercy is a choice we have as human beings through our consciousness to be compassionate, to be caring towards those that are weak, those who are vulnerable, those we have power over. And Cesar Chavez, the great farm workers leader from California, said, history will judge societies and governments and their institutions, not by how big they are or how well they serve the rich and powerful, but by how effectively they respond to the needs of the poor and the helpless. Society will judge governments and institutions not by how well they serve the rich and powerful, but how well they will serve the poor and the helpless. That is a plea for our society, not just as us as individuals, but our institutions to be merciful, to season justice with mercy. What's the connection between mercy and non-violence? The history of non-violence is interesting, and of course we heard in the reading, and we generally hear of the credit of it going to Gandhi and Martin Luther King and people like that. But actually, a lot of the roots of Christian non-violence is rooted in universalism. In the 19th century, there was a Universalist minister called Aidan Ballou who actually wrote the first Christian treatise on non-violence called Christian Non-Resistance. And he wrote it in 1846. And it was the most popular book on Christian pacifism. And this is a time in the middle of the 19th century, prior to the Civil War, where there was a lot of utopian ideas. And Aidan Ballou started the Hopedale community, which was a Universalist community that was kind of idealistic and utopian in its view, where they were trying to create equality and there'll be no punishment of children. At the time, corporal punishment was quite rife. And I remember he had this child that was really badly behaved, and Aidan Ballou said to the child, normally in a school, they would whip you, they would beat you for your misbehavior, but I can't do that. So I ask you to beat me for your bad behavior. He was quite radical in his thinking, as you can probably tell. And the child said, no, I cannot do that. I promise I will behave myself now. So he even took his pacifism into the classroom. But you can hear that, that's idealistic in a kind of school classroom sense. But he also saw pacifism and non-violence as a way to end slavery. And he was a strong abolitionist. But of course, slavery didn't really end in the United States without the Civil War. So a lot of these utopian ideas of non-violence and pacifism really ended with the Civil War, where it took the violence of the Civil War to overcome the evil institution of slavery. But that's not where Aidan Ballew's influence stopped. He was read by many throughout the world, and Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian writer, became very influenced by his writing in Christian Non-Resistance, his book on Christian pacifism. And through Tolstoy, he influenced Gandhi and Martin Luther King. So there's a real connection from Aidan Ballew's writing in 1846 all the way through to the non-violence of Gandhi and King. So in many ways, our universalist idea of non-violence influenced these great people that we associate with non-violence. Because of course, there's no immaculate conception of any idea. It's all built upon people developing it and taking it, and it evolves into these different contexts. And of course, King and Gandhi were certainly popularized it and were successful in the work they did, for King for civil rights and Gandhi leading for independence from Britain. But where did Aidan Ballew come up with that idea? He really grounded it in the teachings of Jesus. Resist not the evildoer, it says in Matthew 5:39, where Jesus asks to turn the other cheek. But Aidan Ballew saw that this resistance to violence, or this, not subscribing to violence, could actually be an act of great resistance. Of course, anger is a legitimate emotion, and we look at the world around us, and there's lots to be angry about. We see injustice in our neighborhoods, we see greed and radical individualism causing so much suffering throughout the world. And one of my great goals as a minister, I used to want to create great good, but now I see my role as I just want to reduce suffering wherever I can see it. And you see this cycle of violence and revenge and vengeance just perpetrating throughout the world and just causing greater and greater and greater suffering. But one of the most inspiring stories to me comes from one of the most troubled parts of our world. Basically, it's really occupied Palestine. And it's about this couple, Ishmael and Abla Khadib, and they lived in the Jenin refugee camp on the West Bank, probably one of the most difficult places to live currently, and rife with suffering. And their 12-year-old son, Ahmed, was shot by the Israeli army. And he was carrying a toy gun, which even his friends said did look like a real gun, and the Israeli soldier shot him. But then the Israelis realized they made a mistake and apologized. But Ahmed's parents, Ishmael and Abla, didn't call for violence or revenge or vengeance. The son had been taken to a hospital in Israel, and they said, please take his organs to give life to others. And they knew full well that many of the recipients of these organs would be Israelis. And they took his organs and they were transplanted into 6 Israelis, 4 of whom were Jewish. And it seems like a kind, compassionate act, but Ahmed's father, Ishmael, said, yes, that was an act of compassion, but it was also an act of resistance. He said he wants that through this act, the hope is that the Israeli people will learn that the lesson of what we have done, those 6 people will learn that we Palestinians are human beings too, and we are connected between the Palestinian and the Jewish people. I think that's an incredible act of compassion. It's an incredible act of mercy, and it's an incredible act of resistance. And if only more of us could find such a ways to resist wrongdoing, because those people had experienced one of the most tragic events anyone could experience, the loss of their son due to violence. But they found a way of engaging this act of resistance and justice. And I think that's a great example of justice seasoned with mercy. They did not call for vengeance or revenge in an area where that's all too common to this day. And of course, mercy is at the root of forgiveness, and mercy can exist without forgiveness, but I don't think forgiveness can exist without some sense of mercy. And one of my favorite verses of the Bible is Micah 6:8 of the Christian scriptures. And it says, or it's actually the Jewish scriptures, it says, "And what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." To do justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. And that was in reply to how the Jews should worship. I think that what a great example for Unitarian Universalists as well, to walk humbly with your God, to love mercy and to do justice. And those words are actually in the walls of the Unitarian Universalist Church in San Francisco, where I first discovered Unitarian Universalism and became a member. So what does it mean to love mercy? I think what it means is to put mercy highest up in our values and to strive towards it, not when it's easy and but when it's most difficult, when you're angry, when you're called to revenge, you're called to hurt others because you are badly hurt, to love mercy and find a way of connecting people, to reach into kindness, to compassion, and to generosity when it's the last thing you feel like doing. Because I think what mercy, to love mercy, asks us to go beyond our judgment and find some imaginative way of enacting compassion into the world, throwing that rich blessing out into the world that's an act of kindness, where so much of you is pulled towards an act of violence or cruelty or hurt. And we heard about this wonderful act of mercy by a couple in Palestine in difficult circumstances. But we've got a great act of mercy within our own Unitarian Universalist history and relatively recent history. In 2017, the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly was in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was there, and some of you might have been there as well. And it was a great time. And interestingly, the night of the Whale lecture, Brian Stevenson, who is a lawyer who does a lot of work with death row inmates, he gave a talk, and he's got a book called Just Mercy, and it was made into a movie. It's a fabulous book if you ever get a chance. I haven't seen the movie. But he gave one of the most incredible talks I have ever heard that night at the Whale lecture. And my daughter, who was young at the time, she was 14, and she loved it so much, she got the book and got him to sign it, and waited about 45 minutes to get him to sign it. It was an incredible talk. But his book is called Just Mercy, and his work in the death row is certainly part of that. But that's not what the story is about. It's an incident that happened that same night. 2 of our UUA staff members were walking in the French Quarter and got violently attacked and beaten up and mugged by a gang of young youths. And it was really quite violent. One of them was in the hospital for a few weeks. The other was in for a couple of months. And I felt a lot of anger at that. I was in the path to vengeance. and revenge at that point. But our UUA movement really lived into our values and really called for this restorative justice approach, a community relation-based approach where harm is acknowledged, but work is done to repair the damage. And and there was a lot of tensions there because the gang of youth were African American and the two people attacked were white, so it kind of stirred up some of the racial tensions as well. But we called for this restorative justice process through the court systems. And needless to say, the justice system worked its way, and the people, some of them they were all youths, ended up doing prison time. But our act of mercy, our act of calling for restorative justice and not just punishment is rooted in our Unitarian Universalist tradition, because we have been working towards prison reform. Our Universalist tradition, where all people will be saved, calls us to change prisons from places of punishment to places of redemption, because no one is beyond redemption. And that act got a lot of publicity in New Orleans. It did not change necessarily the outcome, though it might have softened the sentences. But that's not where the story ends. A couple of years later, we were hosting this Undoing Racism workshop at my congregation in Austin, where I was serving prior to coming to Redwood City. And this is the institution who runs this Undoing Racism. It's the Institution for People of Survival and Beyond. And they're rooted, they started in the 1980s in New Orleans, and they're a national organization doing anti-racist work throughout. And I was talking to one of the facilitators, because we donated the space, and I'd go out and talk to the other facilitators and thank them for being there. And when the facilitator said, I was talking to him, and I said, where are you from? He said, I'm from New Orleans. I said, I was just there a couple of years ago for a General Assembly. He goes, I remember. You guys did good. I said, sorry, we did good. What do you mean? And he was African American and a native New Orleans person. And he said, I remember those two staff members of yours that got assaulted. And our community was so inspired and impressed that you called for restorative justice. We don't often see visitors to a city, especially white visitors, asking for that for our youth. We remember that and we respected that. I remember being so powerfully moved by that. And I think that's one of the things that mercy can do. It may not have immediate benefits at the time. And Gandhi and King did their work. Gandhi almost 100 years ago, King 60, 70 years ago, but we remember their work because of the methods they used. And that can inspire other people to engage this idea of non-violence rooted in mercy, non-violence in prioritizing the relationship with those that have harmed us and not just seeking punishment. It's the difference between reacting emotionally and responding with compassion. And the Unitarian Universalist minister, Reverend Gretchen Haley, says, what does our faith ask us? What does our faith imagine for us? It's right at the moment when our hearts break, we will find a way to see through the heartbreak. We will stay put, not close off, not run away, not hurt back, but keep on being in relationship, doing what we can to repair the world and each other. So mercy has the same positive, life-affirming goals as justice. It lies on the same scales of value as justice. But for those of us who take a merciful stand at the growing edge of what community sees as good, we move beyond the point which justice does not need to go. The point at which creativity of mercy envisions that more is possible. Mercy, in short, pushes the envelope of society's values to a more caring, compassionate, and more loving place. As Shakespeare said, The quality of mercy is not strained. It's up to each of us to season our justice with mercy. I invite you now to take a moment of silence. I invite you now to join me in the closing hymn, To Mercy, Pity, Peace and Love. It's number 93 in our hymnal, but today we'll be singing these words to the tune of Amazing Grace. We'll be adding a fourth verse to the three in the hymnal. This is the fourth verse. It's really an inclusive point the author William Blake was making back in 1793. And our version was arranged by Tom Devine and sung by the UUCC choir with Linda Grace Frost. So please rise in body or spirit and add your voice, or just listen to this beautiful hymn, To Mercy, Pity, Peace and Love.
To mercy, pity, peace, and love, all pray in their distress, and to these virtues of delight return their thankfulness.
For mercy has a human heart,
Pity a human face, and love the human form divine, and peace the human dress. Then every one of every clime that prays in deep distress, praise to the human form divine, love, mercy, pity, peace. And all must love the human form, in heathen, Turk, or Jew, where mercy, love, and pity dwell, there God is dwelling too.
Now we'll extinguish the chalice flames. Please join with me in reading these words by Elizabeth Sella Jones. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I'd like to now offer some closing words. I invite each of you to think, what conscious choice do you want to make to how do you respond to your wrongdoing? The wrongdoing that we may have suffered personally, and there's wrongdoing we may have suffered to the community. Can we find a way of responding with love, with compassion, with kindness, and not reacting with revenge or anger? Revenge. I mean, anger has its place, but is not an end goal. It can be a path to mercy if we are able to respond and not react. And remember, mercy is grounded in love, and our Unitarian Universalist tradition calls us to love all people and center the love of all people out of humanity. So I invite you to go with love, go in love, and blessed be, and amen.
Thank you, Reverend Brian, for your inspirational words. We also want to acknowledge our first Sunday production team, Chalice Lighter and Extinguisher, Dave Rakowski, Music Director and Reader, Tom Devine, Artistic Director and Bearer of Handkerchiefs for My Panicked Soul, Noreen Cooper Hevlin, and our Session Management Engineer and Video Editor, Bruce Raffnell, whose capabilities, the sum total, have yet to be all revealed. And we want to acknowledge our talented UUCC choir and Vera Vandershock for her gorgeous classical guitar pieces played during Joys and Concerns. And thank you all for participating in this timely service today. Now, we're going to have some breakout rooms immediately following the service. I get to create breakout rooms. And they'll serve as a safe space for us to talk openly and honestly about today's topic or anything else you might have on your minds. We hope you'll all join us in these breakout rooms. Please keep in mind that what is said there stays there, but thoughts and concepts certainly that we learn and inspired by can definitely be shared. So please be thoughtful of the time so that anyone who wishes to speak has the opportunity to do so. And maybe you have questions, but whether or not you have questions, we got questions. So here are some discussion points to consider. Shakespeare invites us to season justice with mercy. What does that mean to you, and how might we do it? Mercy and nonviolence are values at the growing edge of what our society views as good. What is being merciful in our personal life and our society? Why is it being merciful in our personal life and society? Why is it so difficult? Anger and fear are some of our most primal and powerful emotions. How can we nurture more mercy and compassion as an antidote to anger and fear? Okay, so just a few minutes. I'll give everybody permission to unmute themselves. Have a safe and happy day.